And we are live. Hello and welcome to what we hope will be a regular series of community-oriented live streams for the Q project. My name is... Oh, hang on a second. I've got a bit of feedback on my side over here. I was just checking that the YouTube live stream is working as well. Please welcome to anybody who's joining us on YouTube Live. And please feel free to add any comments in there if we've got any problems with audio or anything like that. Yes, as I said, my name is Paul Jolly. I'm one of the core project maintainers for the Q project. And today we welcome guest Daniel Marty to help us explain how to contribute to the Q project. But before we get started, let me just remind you of the Q project homepage, which we had up as a caption at the start. There we go. And also of the project's Twitter handle as well. There's been quite a lot of chatter on Twitter recently, and it's just a good way for us to make announcements to the community as well outside of the GitHub repository. So please follow us on Twitter as well. So let's just motivate why we're talking about contributing to the Q project today. On the recent Q community town hall, I discussed with Marcel what we should be solving for on the Q project. Growing the Q community is obviously a key overarching goal, but how do we actually achieve that sustainably? We can have sort of many users, and that can be a curve that's growing nice and steeply. But in order for that to be sustainable, we also need to grow the contributor base as well. And to do that, we need to foster a nice, warm, welcoming community that ensures that people feel comfortable and able to make contributions to the project. We also need to see that their contributions are recognized as well, because as we'll discuss a bit later on, there are many different ways in which people can contribute to an open source project. And that sustainability of contributions, whatever form they may come in, is sort of a key to the project's success, but also the growth of the user base as well. Marcel and I also discussed that, and Daniel will also talk about this as well, that contributions come from people in very different circumstances. Some doing things as part of their day job, others perhaps more sporadically in their spare time, and everything in between on that spectrum. As part of a well-run open source project as well, people should also be very clear if something they see is not working correctly, how to report that, and the process behind what it is involved in actually contributing a fix as well. So what we're aiming for is to make the Q project one that really actively responds to feedback as well. So for anyone who interacts with the project in a way that is, from their perspective, suboptimal, for example, understanding that we should understand that experience and reflect whether there is, within the constraints of the wider project, anything that can be done to improve that situation. And as far as the contribution process is concerned, that's why we're very much open to want to respond quickly to feedback on how we can make the contribution process easier. And so the live stream today is really a sort of a first attempt at iterating on that. And we'll talk with Daniel in a second about what it means to contribute to the Q project. And hopefully Daniel can share some tips with us on how we can make that contribution process better for people who arrive at the Q project as well. But before we get any further, let's just do proper introductions. As I said, my name is Paul Jolly. I'm one of the core project members on the Q project. You can see my Twitter handle there. Please follow me on Twitter and feel free to ping me with any questions Q related, especially when it comes to contributing to the project. Feel free to drop me a DM or anything like that. Yes, other than that, I'm going to now let Daniel introduce himself as well.
So my name is Daniel, like Paul said. I've been a Q user for a couple of years, and I've also been a Go user and contributor for a number of years. So this is the context as to why I believe in making contributions an easy thing to do. I've also been organizing the Tools Working Group, which is a bit of a technical group within the Go project that talks about tooling and editor integration and stuff like that. So we have monthly calls, we coordinate on changes, stuff like that. I also maintain a bunch of projects, and more concerned about contributing in particular, I ran a bunch of contributing workshops before COVID times in places like London or conferences. And the point of that was that a bunch of people would say, well, many people would say, contributing to Go is a bit difficult because Garrett is this new thing that they don't know, and they're confused by the CI system or like what changes might be accepted. So the workshop was a way to like get some one-on-one time with people and show them, well, it's actually not that hard if you get, if you get a few basic tips and you follow a guide.
Fantastic. And you've been mentoring a number of individuals as well as they navigate their first contributions to the Go project as well. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, because what I believe is a bit difficult or a bit different about large open source projects is that when people work on open source, they might expect the contribution flow to be fairly simple. Just see something that's wrong or that can be done better, send a PR, get it reviewed and merged within 2 days, and then it's in master and it's shipped, right? But with a large open source project, you have many more factors. They probably don't use GitHub pull request reviews. They might use something like Garrett. They probably merge way more slowly because maybe they don't have enough people to review all the PRs that come in. They might only ship things every 6 months or every 12 months, depending on the release schedule. You might not know who to ask for reviews because they're probably a larger team. So there's a lot of nuances that if you're new, you lack the context, and that might lead to your contribution not being picked up or merged very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and that might be a bit discouraging. So the slight hand holding is a way to like make them see that it's not as bad as it seems if
Yeah.
you follow some basic principles.
And you mentioned a couple of things, a couple of words there which people might not be familiar with. Garrett, we'll come to explain what Garrett is in a second, and I guess that's sort of kind of your point as well, is that there might be terminology, processes that are unfamiliar to folks who have contributed to other open source projects. What sort of tools and techniques? And you talked about workshops, but is there anything else that you found? Is there, for example, a Slack channel that's worked well for new contributors on the Go project?
Yeah, I think chat is actually a really good medium for this kind of thing because you might get some contributors in different time zones. You might get some others who are not very familiar with, showing their face on a video call, or who might be a little bit shy about asking for help directly to somebody in particular with a DM or a private message.
Mhm.
So, for example, in the Gopher Slack, which is a non-official but the biggest chat platform for the Go project itself, there's a couple of channels like contributing or like contributor workshop, and sometimes you get people in that channel saying, hey, I made this PR a week ago and nothing has happened, can somebody please help me? Or hey, I sent this Garrett change 2 months ago and it's still in review, what happened, can somebody guide me as to who I should ping, stuff like that.
So the contributor workshops, and I've been present at a few of those that you've run. They were at GopherCon. I think we did a couple, didn't we, at GopherCon UK 2 years in a row, and indeed at the main GopherCon as well. It just, when you're in person like that, and obviously this was in pre-COVID times, you get that immediate feedback. You can also, I found it quite instructive as well for people who are enthusiastic about contributing. The questions that they ask are often quite revealing about how the documentation and guides about how to contribute are in some ways lacking. It sort of shows that that there are sometimes we have areas where we're not so familiar of, don't have experience ourselves, and people bring this different experience or different way of thinking about something, and that allows us actually to go, you know what, let's that's an interesting dimension, let's add that to the documentation. So I guess your point there is that the Slack channels end up being a continuation of that workshop in some respects, right? Because it's that more immediate feedback that is better suited to hey, I'm working through this right now and struggling. So I'm sure people are fairly appreciative of the Slack channel in that respect.
Yeah, and I also believe that the instant chat is a bit nicer than, for example, email or GitHub discussions or issues
For
because in a
this,
way
definitely.
it's more informal and more instantaneous.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to make a PR and I want to quickly ask, hey, what's the status of this? I'm more likely to send a quick message on a public chat as opposed to like write a proper email, raise a proper issue,
Yeah.
because that's more like async and takes more of my time basically.
I think it's probably the case as well that the contribution, for better or for worse, the contribution flow for open source projects is just that bit more messy than, for example, something that you can clearly document as, here is how you write the tests. People's setups are there's no guarantee that people have exactly the same setups. And so it's against that sort of a very different background, that there is that hand-holding required in order to ensure that people have the correct path setting and whatever it might be. And so chat ends up being fairly essential in that respect. Well, I think that's probably something we should aim towards on the Q project as well, is not only growing the contributor base, but growing the base of people who can help bring on new contributors as well, because that then has a multiplicative effect as well. So thank you for your introduction, Daniel. Let's just remind everybody the plan for today is to discuss how to contribute to the Q project. But most importantly, why you would want to be contributing in the different ways as well. So should we start by sharing your screen, Daniel? That's probably the next step. And a warning that, as with anything that involves a live demo, things can and likely will go wrong as part of this. Indeed, if we find any problems as we go through the contributing guide, we might well do. I'll watch this recording back afterwards. And just ensure that we have sort of issues raised or indeed fixes made to the contributing guide. So go for it, Daniel, if you want to share your screen, and we'll start, I think, on the Q homepage itself.
Yep, I should already be sharing my screen.
Give me 1 second. I will just... There we go.
Great.
Fantastic. So there we can see up in this is the landing page where most people will end up sort of learning about the Q project. However, they've got here, it's the most common link. Up at the top navigation bar, we've got a link to the GitHub repository. So if we click on that, we've then got the main README here, which if you scroll further down, you can easily use the I found this table of contents button. Yes, there we go. And if you scroll down within the table of contents towards the bottom, we've got contributing section there. And then that leads in the second paragraph there to the contribution guide. So the contribution guide is really what we're going to work through today. For anybody else, let me just turn off the caption there so we can see things a bit better. For anybody following along or watching the recording afterwards, this really is your place to start when it comes to understanding how to contribute to the Q project. So let me just flip to that page myself locally here. Daniel, something else Marcel and I talked about on the Q Town Hall is that there are very many ways to contribute to an open source project, and Q is one such open source project. This first section here is really dedicated to that, to really highlight to anybody who's reading this document that as project maintainers and owners, we recognize those different ways. This is, I don't know what your feelings are, but perhaps whenever you land on an open source project, I look at the contribution graph and I'm sort of slightly struck by the fact that looks at one very specific way in which people contribute to a project, and that's just code contributions. But as this list sort of suggests, there are very many other ways. What's your experience on that as well?
I think that's very right. And I think we could maybe look at a specific example, which is the Go project itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it does get quite a lot of new contributors because Go is a relatively simple language and it's self-implemented in Go.
Mm-hmm.
So it is easy to find something to fix over time and send a quick PR. But what the project has struggled with more is finding contributions in the form of reviews and maintainers. Because that work is not as sexy as sending a quick fix and then saying, hey, I got something merged into Go. And it's also a little bit more tedious to long-term maintain something, go like every few days and review changes and essentially look out for like the long-term health of, for example, a standard library package.
Yeah, so I think that's good. And mentioning Go, it's just for folks who aren't very familiar with the Q project. Q itself, Marcel, who was the creator of Q, was on the Go team for around 10 years. And so a lot of the engineering practices and principles, if you like, derive very heavily from the Go project. Indeed, the means of contributing to the Q project mirror quite closely those of the Go project, and which is why a lot of the time you might even hear us talking sort of interchangeably, about the Q project and the Go project. There's quite a lot of similarity between the two. And I think just to build on what you're saying there, Daniel, as well, glancing down this list here, it's a long list. I'm certainly not going to read through it, but I'll just start at the top there. We're using Q as a form of contributing itself. And much like the Go programming language as well, if you actually use something and you find problems with what it is you're trying to do with either the Go programming language or the Q project, that is a form of contributing, because that's inevitably going to lead to you asking a question somewhere, perhaps raising an issue, raising feedback. And very, very often that's an incredibly valuable form of feedback and contributing. You've probably got a lot more of experience this than me, Daniel, with the Go project, because you sort of sit quite closely on the Go issue tracker. Is that your experience for the Go project as well?
Yeah. And I believe something that they really want people to do as well is to test master, the latest development version.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, when betas and RCs come out for the upcoming Go version, some
RC
people
being
try
a
those.
RC being a release candidate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some people do try those, but 90% or more of the users only try the stable releases. And then when something breaks, it's sort of too late to fix it, right?
Yeah.
So people running master continuously, reporting bugs, finding out lacking things, that is very useful because you catch those problems much more at an earlier stage.
That's actually a very nice segue into the second point here. Is that for the Q project, we don't have the benefit as the Go project does of a very large code base against which you can run tests to validate a particular version of Go. So when the Go project is preparing to create a new release, what they do is there's a very large Go code base internally at Google, and they use that amongst other code bases in order to validate that release. Q does not have that benefit. It's much younger as a project, and so what we've established is a system called Unity that helps, to which people can add their repositories, their projects, and that helps us as a project to effectively run regression tests and even performance tests as well against a much wider code base. So that adding your project to Unity, and you'll see this is linked from the guide here, is a very significant contribution. Because it helps us as project maintainers ensure just high quality releases. And I'm trying to think, is that we had about 3, 4, or 5, maybe even releases where Unity, we were using Unity from sort of the earlier part of this year, earlier in 2021. And in every single release, we found issues that were picked up by Unity, i.e., that the unit tests and tests that were part of the core Q project didn't flag an issue. But when we were then using Q in the wild, i.e., via the projects that had been added to Unity, we found issues, generally performance problems. And so adding your project to Unity is a fantastic way of contributing to the project, because it sort of is very much a forward-looking thing. It helps to prevent future releases having performance problems or bugs, whatever they might be. So please, if you've got any questions about that, feel free to ping me directly or ask questions in Slack or in a GitHub discussion. And I can just link the Q GitHub repository for anyone who's wanting to jump over there now and raise a GitHub discussion, for example. Just briefly glancing through the rest of the list here, we said asking questions is an incredibly good way before. But as we said, asking questions even about something like the contribution process does help to highlight gaps in documentation, raising issues with bug reports. It not only is that helpful in telling us that there's a bug somewhere, but it often helps provide test cases as well, because they can readily be reduced down. With those issues and feature requests having been created, Daniel, this is something that you've got a lot of experience with. Issue gardening, as it's sometimes referred to as well, it is an incredibly valuable incredibly valuable for the project maintainers, because it helps to get issues in whatever form they are into a familiar shape, format, and voice, for want of a better phrase, for the project maintainers, so it's much easier to pick them up and actually do something with it. Can you talk about what your involvement with that on the Go project?
So at the simplest level, it's essentially just as issues come in, do the first filter on them. So maybe some of them are clear duplicates. Maybe some of them are questions that have been asked 20 times before. So you can directly close them and ask them to either look at the previous answers or ask somewhere else. That's
Mhm.
not the issue tracker. Some of them are valid bugs or feature requests. So then you might ping a couple of maintainers, or you might add a label saying needs a decision or needs investigation, that kind of thing. But at a more holistic level, I think issue gardening is about Whereas some of what we talked about before is actually making changes to the code. I see taking care of the issue tracker as a way of making sure you're working on the right things, right?
Mhm.
Because feature requests might come in. If you don't handle them properly, maybe you're never going to implement them if they just sit there, or maybe they went to the wrong person, or maybe there's a proposal for a feature request, and the discussion doesn't flow well because the medium doesn't work well.
Yep. Tell me, how did you get started on issue gardening? Did somebody invite you to actually start issue gardening, or what happened?
So at least from my point of view, I did write Go for like a year and a half or so,
Hmm.
and then I started thinking, well, I would like to learn more things because at one point you've read most of the popular blog posts, and you've read the language spec and you've read the tutorials, and you're like, well, I know the basics, but I would like to learn a little bit more.
Hmm.
Uh, but you sort of run out of accessible content like books or like blog posts, because at some point you know most of what they're saying in on average. So one way that I found to get a bit more of an edge in terms of knowledge was to follow the commits going into master for the Go project, but also the issues as they came in to the issue tracker. Um, and over time, as I was doing that, I sort of started to realize which ones were um, high quality bug reports, for example, which ones should go to what person, which ones needed this label, which others were clear duplicates because I saw the same issue a week ago.
Yep.
And at one point, you're like, well, I could just start doing these little steps as I'm reading through the issues. And why not? It's a way of helping, right?
And it being an open source project, you don't need to be asked. You literally start doing these things. And I guess for you, so it sounds like from your perspective, it's very much a way of learning more about Go itself, how the project is run. And I'm sure the maintainers of the project at the time were very open to that and sort of encouraging of it, because of course everybody needs to start somewhere and there's not a clear guide that you can follow as to how to do issue gardening. So it's a case of going by feel and then being steered, I guess, by other responses that you see. Great, thank you. We should just say at this point thank you to Tony Worm, who has been a very prolific issue gardener on the Q project, especially during the summer break. Tony's been responding to a number of issues and helping to get them into that sort of familiar shape, um, marking things as duplicates, helping to create reproducers, as well as responding to a number of discussions. So that's very much appreciated. And as Daniel was just sort of suggesting there, anybody else is very welcome to do the same. And if you have any questions or concerns about how to do issue gardening or get involved in that, please, as again just said, feel free to ping us. Code contributions is the next point here. That's the main focus of this guide, so we'll come back to that in a second. We talked about briefly on the town hall as well about proposals. We're going to be documenting a bit more clearly what the proposal process is for Q, because like Go, it being a language, proposals need to be considered rather more holistically. There's a lot of different edge cases to consider. And so we'll be sharing about how we're going to improve the proposal process, make it clear to folks, okay, what are the what if you like the steps are involved, so that people can look at a process, look at a proposal and see where it's at, understand what the next steps are as well. The next bullet point that I've got down there is creating content. This is a fantastic way of contributing. And we mentioned John Arundel's blog post about Q in the town hall, and it got some more publicity yesterday. It's a fantastic way of helping to grow the Q community, whether it be a blog post or a live stream or tweeting. Different people have, as I say in the point here, different people have different ways of explaining things, and those different styles are very often appealing to different people, and so that many and varied sort of content platform, if you like. Well, not that it's a platform, but just having lots of varied content is a very good way, I think, of helping Q get to different audiences. So please let us know if there's anything that's missing, though, from the core Q website, because, again, those gaps really need to be plugged so that those folks who are interested in creating content can write about more interesting use cases and applications for Q rather than having to effectively repeat what should be on the core website. Daniel, you talked about this, the last bullet point here, holding community events. We're everything's rather virtual at the moment, but you've had a lot of experience running community events in London and then Sheffield as well as for the Go project.
Yeah, I think there's a human aspect to meeting in person that you can get to some degree if you do video calls and you can see people and there's not a lot of lag. But the social aspect, I think, can also be important to essentially build a strong project, open source project long term. Because once you build that empathy with other people, I find that it's easier to work with them in general.
Yep. So we look forward to some in-person meetups at some point in the future. And if anybody's wanting to coordinate sort of Q-related events, please feel free to do so via the GitHub discussions. That's probably an excellent way of announcing events in the first place, but coordinating them as well, kind of by default in the process. Okay, that's really covers effectively what we understand as being the multiple ways in which people can contribute. If we're missing anything there, please raise an issue to suggest an amendment to this list here. But it's probably a good point to say thank you to everybody who contributes to the Q community in whatever form. As we said, GitHub doesn't have a good means of tracking contributions outside of code contributions, but everybody's contributions are greatly valued. So thank you very much. But as we said, we're focusing today on code contributions in the next part of the live stream in any case. So let's move on to, as you've just scrolled down to, Daniel, the contributing code and sort of the first steps as well before contributing code. I guess it's quite tempting at times to just dive straight in, isn't it? And make a change where you think it needs to be made or where you know it needs to be made. But Daniel, you made a very good point earlier on about in larger projects, things don't necessarily work in quite such a responsive way.
Yeah, and I also think the issue tracker as a project gets larger becomes more and more important. And I think this section goes into detail into this bit.
Yeah.
And especially for new contributors, I think labels like help wanted or good first issue are invaluable because if I'm new to Q and I want to start helping, um, I probably don't yet have enough context and knowledge. So, for example, help triaging the issue tracker or helping make decisions and proposals. But I might know how to fix small bugs if people give me a few examples of simple things that can be fixed, right?
Yep. And I guess given the inherently distributed nature of open source and async nature of interactions as well, would you say that in your experience with the Go project, the issue tracker is, for better or worse, like your main form of communication with other contributors?
I would say it definitely is. At the same time, as the project grows larger, you start relying more and more heavily on good organization because if you just try to consume the list of issues, you're just going to run out of time, even if you spend weeks on it, because there's just too much content, too many open issues, right? So
Yep.
that's why, for example, labels become incredibly useful.
Indeed. And that sort of segues nicely into this next section here, which is checking the issue tracker. It's always the first place to go when you're thinking about making a contribution, or as Daniel was saying earlier on, it's just some issue gardening, trying to learn more about the project. Here we try to highlight what are the most important of the labels that get attached to issues. I'll just read out the titles of them here as opposed to explaining them, because that's covered in the guide itself. Triage needs one of the project maintainers to have a look at. Needs investigation is fairly self-explanatory. Needs decision, where a maintainer needs to make a decision on what to do about a particular bug report or feature request. Needs fix, again, fairly self-explanatory. A decision has been made that, yes, this is a bug, or this needs to now be fixed in some way, shape, or form. Help wanted and good first issue are, as Daniel said, just sort of good signs to people that actually, okay, help wanted here. We need input from someone who has experience or expertise on something. And good first issue is very much something that it should be a candidate for someone who's looking to make their first contribution. And we're going to try and do better. It is something that we can always do better at, of thinking about, fine, this actually is an issue where it could be a good first-time contribution, and so marking issues as such. As we say there, open an issue for any new problem that you encounter. That's important not only because it helps people to effectively verify the issue independently of your report, but also prevents somebody else duplicating that effort of trying to reproduce the issue themselves. So as soon as you find something, quickly create an issue. Even if it's a duplicate, that's no problem at all. Don't worry, it'll just get marked as a duplicate, but it saves somebody else perhaps going to the effort of trying to reduce a problem that they've seen down to a smaller reproducer. Anything else on the issue tracker, Daniel?
I think that was a very good summary.
Great. Okay. So let's move on to becoming a code contributor. If you just want to scroll a bit further down in the document there we go. So as we say here, we assume that you have, as a code contributor, you have a basic understanding of Git and Go, and we'll assume Go 1.16 or later for this process as well. Let's just have a look here. So yes, what we're going to talk about today is the two different ways in which you can contribute changes to the Q project. One is via what will perhaps be a more familiar workflow to people, which is via GitHub, and the other via GerritHub. Both of these workflows are fully supported, and as the document says, whilst GerritHub is used by core project maintainers as the source of truth, the GitHub pull request workflow is 100% supported. So if you feel more comfortable using GitHub pull request, that's entirely fine. No problem at all. It's fully supported and will always be so on the Q project. Something that is slightly different, although it's becoming a bit more common, is the developer certificate of origin. Daniel, is this something you've come across in your experience before?
I think I've heard of similar ideas as opposed to, for example, a CLA, but I'm not sure if I've actually read this one.
Fine. So like if you've contributed to the Go project, you do sign up to the CLA. I think that stands for Contributor License Agreement.
Yep.
Fine. And that's something that where you acknowledge to Google, my contributions are, I think, sort of not constrained in any way by my employer. I'm not going to try and reproduce it here, but it's effectively a way of asserting I am able to make these contributions and not... and my employer, if that's the case, has allowed me to do so, etc. So the developer certificate of origin is a similar kind of assertion. And again, that's the text of that is reproduced here for convenience. And the way that you actually do that is by signing off a commit. And if you just go back to the contributing guide, Daniel, as you can see there, just scroll down, there we go, just below the actual reproduced text there. What happens is that you end up getting a signed off by line as part of your commit message. And the way to get that in there is to, instead of just doing a plain git commit, is to do a git commit -s is the short form of the flag. And that adds that signed off by automatically for you to a commit. We'll actually talk later on about how to entirely automate that process so you don't even need the -s flag. But that way, every single commit that lands as part of the Q project now has this signed off by line, which is an individual developer's assertion of the developer certificate of origin. Fine, so let's just move on to the next section here. We talked about there being two different ways, and we'll start with the GitHub pull request contribution model. Should we just work through this together, Daniel, if that's good with you? I think probably the best way to do that is to just go through this step by step, if that works for you. Fantastic.
Yep.
So as we got here, there's three overall, in overview, there's effectively three steps involved with preparing for a GitHub pull request contribution. Perhaps if you just want to open as separate tabs, Daniel, those three links from step 0 there, good commit messages, the review process, and miscellaneous topics, we'll effectively come back to those in more detail later on. But this is just, again, back to Daniel's point about how larger open source projects do things in a slightly more structured way in order to help reduce the burden from an individual contributor's perspective and also for the maintainers. These sections here about good commit messages, the review process, and some miscellaneous points there are really designed to help you try and get you as a new contributor into the mindset of, okay, how does this project actually work? And again, if you have feedback about any of these points, please absolutely raise it. But the idea is that if we can refine these processes as much as possible, that this just smooths the contribution process as much as possible. It makes it easier to contribute, but also easier to then review and get changes merged in as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to I'm not going to particularly go through these now, just to sort of flag that they exist, and that's a good starting point. That should give you, as a first-time contributor, an overview of what it means to actually be contributing to something, a code contribution to the Q project. So let's just jump back to the guide itself where we were. And so step one is creating a GitHub account. I'm assuming you have a GitHub account, so we can skip over that here. Step two, forking the Q project and cloning your fork locally. Now, I've actually, thanks. I've just linked to the GitHub documentation here. Daniel, I think you work with the GitHub command line tool, don't you? Is there anything, I've sort of skipped detail here, and maybe I was remiss in actually doing that. What would your suggestion be here on how we can better communicate to people how to get set up with the GitHub contribution process?
I think with GitHub it depends, because some people will want, for example, I use the GH GitHub CLI tool, but you don't have to. It just makes a few things a bit easier. Some other people might prefer to, for example, edit code directly on GitHub's web code editor, which is something that exists now.
Yep.
So I don't think there's going to be a single workflow. I think the one you linked to is very reasonable as a starting point. I can show what I would do, which is slightly different, but basically the same.
Shall we do that? Because let's just imagine then that, yes, as you said, we're not going to do the web-based contribution flow here, but as Daniel's saying, he's not going to follow the guide that's linked to here. As far as forking the project is concerned, he's going to do what he would do. And again, I think it's probably worth trying to at least link to those different means by which people can, either via the web base or using the GitHub client, so that people understand what the option space is there. So that's a good bit of feedback. Thanks. So over to you on how you would actually get started here.
So I have a directory here where I just clone stuff. I would clone just simply the github.com HTTPS URL.
Okay.
Shouldn't take too long. So once I'm in here, I do have the origin remote pointing to upstream, which is QLang itself.
Okay.
So I believe there's...
And GH here, you're just about to type a command, is this GitHub command line tool, is it? Let's just
see if we can... I can show it very briefly. I think it's this one, CLI. It's a bit confusing that the repo is called CLI, but the tool is called GH. But yeah, this holds the GH tool. And
I'm just going to try and add a link in a caption there.
And this does not replace...
There we go. Is that it? That's the one.
Yeah. And just for clarity, this does not replace Git, but it does allow some things like fork this repo or create a PR, which are not doable with plain Git because they need to talk to the GitHub web API. So this makes that a bit easier.
Okay.
So there's a GH repo fork.
And you've just done -H there to sort of show the help for that. Okay.
Exactly. So you can, for example, configure what remote should this be added as. I believe I just use the default. So if I do that, it should add a remote called origin. Git remote. It renamed origin to upstream, and then origin is now my fork.
Okay.
That's fine. They must have changed the defaults. Doesn't really matter. So now I have my master following upstream master. And then I've got origin as my fork. So if we go there, then it should show up.
And I think this terminology around upstreams and forks, if people aren't familiar with that, the linked documentation from the guide will explain more about what that flow, the GitHub flow, actually means there.
Yep. So I believe that is as far as I need to go in terms of preparation steps, because I already have a GitHub account. And my Git is already set up with authentication to it.
Great. So let's just do an ls in that local command, in that local directory you've got there. So people should now be able to see that the code that you have listed here then reflects exactly what we see on the in the GitHub repository homepage as well. Okay, fantastic. So now let's move back to the guide and then the next section, which is sending a change via GitHub. So I think one of the important things, I don't know what your experience with this is just to verify that you've got a stable baseline in the first place, to verify that the test passed for you locally before doing anything.
I'm sorry, I'm running Go Master, so let me just run Go 117. That should
Okay.
work.
So you're running just for everybody who's following along here, I'm just going to make sure I can actually see that command myself. A wgo1 is, can you explain what that is?
That is just an alias that I have for like run this with stable Go, because my default Go command is master.
Okay.
And in this case, it's broken because of a dependency, but it's irrelevant for this
Fine.
particular example. I
So
should be using stable.
indeed. So for anybody else who's sort of following the actual guide itself, if you have Go 116 or Go 117 installed, you will just be able to run go test /.. So
Yeah.
all those tests appear to pass, which is good. So we've got a stable baseline here. We can now make changes, and then if the tests fail, we can be confident that it's as a result of our changes that the tests are actually failing and not some totally unrelated reason from before. Fantastic. Did you have a change in mind for making via the?
I do have one in mind,
Okay.
and as we were going through this guide above here,
Yeah.
my first thought after seeing this is, well, I have an alias for running git commit very easily,
Okay.
and I'm most likely going to forget which GitHub repos require the use of the S flag,
Yep.
because if I only use it in some, I'm most likely going to forget to use it all the time. So I believe this is answered towards the end of the doc.
It is. Yeah. There's a way in which you can totally avoid having to write -s as a flag the whole time. The
Yeah,
primary
so
motivation being exactly that case where you've got aliases or other commands. Yep.
and I only realized this section existed because Paul brought it up earlier. But I think it would be nice to link it very briefly from the bit that says you should use the S flag,
Okay.
or it might say something like or automate the use of it for the clone, right?
Yep.
So I believe what I could do is, where's this
It's
doc
in
contribute?
doc contribute. Yeah.
And by the way, there's a bit of lag with my live stream of the screen, so if I move past something that you're mentioning, I can go back.
Sure. Okay. I'm watching it closely now.
So when committing, use the sign off or S flag. So I would say maybe here, or what is the other one called? Do I really have to add? Oh, what is going to be the anchor to that? That. Or what is this called? A Git hook, a prepare commit message hook, or set up a prepare commit message Git hook with a link to that section, that anchor.
That sounds good.
Maybe I'm gonna actually rewrite that, because it seems like I'm giving the instructions to set up the hook here, which is not the case.
Oh,
So
yeah, good point. So it could
maybe
sort of be an afterthought.
I'll say set up a prepare commit message hook, or use the sign off or S flag when committing. How's that?
Yep, that works totally. Yep. My
So
other
okay.
thought was we could have it as a sort of a separate paragraph, sort of towards the end of that section, as more like an afterthought. But this totally works. Yep.
I think either is reasonable. I guess we could make that an example of code review if you want.
No. Yep. That's a very good idea. Okay.
So git status. So now we've got that modified. I'm gonna switch to a new branch just because it's a change. I don't want to make it straight in master. So I'm gonna make it contribute sign off automation. And then
just to flag one thing there, you're using git switch, which I think is a relatively new Git command, isn't it? Previously, people might have used git checkout -b.
yep,
In
it's
that
exactly the
situation.
same thing.
Perfect. Okay, so just sort of flagging that for anyone who's more familiar with the old workflow.
Yep, it's exactly the same thing. I'm just forcing myself to use it because supposedly git checkout is a bit overloaded. It does a lot of things,
It
and it's
definitely
been
does. Yeah.
it's been replaced by two commands which are more narrowly focused and easier to use. So I'm just trying to force myself to use them.
Thank you. That's probably helpful to everyone who's following, including me.
But yeah, git switch. By default, it only accepts branch names, which is very narrow. It's very hard to mess up, unlike checkout, which can, for example, leave you at a what is it called? When you check out a commit, it leaves you in a weird state. Anyway, so we can do git commit a, and I was already forgetting to do s. So if I do this, this is going to open my editor to write a commit message.
And there we go. We see it's already added the signed off by line for you as well in there. So that's you asserting your developer certificate of origin.
And just to go back to the contribution guide for a second, there's a section about commit messages. So I'm
Yes,
just going to...
you can go from there, or you could have used the table of contents, which I'm starting to become my favorite thing.
Oh, that's a good point. I'm just very used to Control F to search for things.
Same. I would prefer a keyboard shortcut to open the table of contents and then to have it be searchable. That would be even better. But
yeah, if any GitHub employees are listening, that would be useful. So just as a reminder, the general format is the title with the package or directory prefix.
exactly.
Then some paragraphs that are readable and that stick to the right amount of columns. And then if you're fixing an issue, that's the last bit. And there's more details here that you should read if you're not familiar with this format. Indeed. So I believe we could start with doc.
That would be good in this case.
So I'm going to write something like mention the we call it pre-commit message git hook, commit message hook for sign off, and then there's a useful section at the end of the doc to set up a git hook, so we don't have to specify s. Link to it when s is mentioned. Is first mentioned, maybe. And I didn't create an issue for this, so I think I can just leave it there. I'm not fixing anything.
Yep, totally for now. We'll talk about, I guess, when we do the GerritHub workflow, we can actually demonstrate that sort of linking to an issue. Okay.
And like cloning, there's like many ways you could go about creating a GitHub pull request, but there's another command with GH called GH create.
Nice.
So in this case, for example, I believe if I just run it without any flags, it's going to open the browser for me. Oh, where should we push the blah, 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 blah? Right, it's asking me where should I push the branch that I created, because it doesn't know by default, so I'm telling it my fork. What title? Oh, actually, I don't like this. I'm going to use I believe there's a flag. Yeah. There's a flag to use the browser for this, which I think is much easier. Yeah, there you go. So it's opened my browser. And in here you can see I'm creating a pull request targeting qlang q master, where the source repository is my fork with my branch that I just pushed. And then by default, it just reuses the commit title and commit body as the PR title and body.
Perfect. Okay.
And everything else looks fine, so I can just click create pull request.
So now if you just scroll down to the check section, this is by default, we don't automatically run any of the CI, continuous integration workflows. So what I'll do from my side now is actually trigger the CI. So this is what will happen during the review process, is that I can see Daniel's commit here. I'm not sharing my screen, but when I approve and run the CI workflows, we will see those be triggered in, we'll see that update within the status in Daniel's browser, which should happen. There we go. So you can see DCO there. That is an automatic check that runs as part of the PR that verifies that every single commit as part of the PR is signed off with the developer certificate of origin. And then you can see otherwise now the CI matrix is kicked in here. So we're not going to wait for this, but this is effectively ensuring that the changes that Daniel has made, we know they're only a README file, but for completeness, I'm actually just triggered it so we can demonstrate here what would happen. We're just making sure that the changes that Daniel has made run in Go 1.15, 1.16, and 1.17. So that way we have strong confidence in the change that's actually been made here. Okay, great. Let me just dive in to do one thing. I'm going to, we can sort of, oops, fighting Windows over here. What I'm going to do in my browser is actually make a suggestion. So I'm going to review the changes, and then we can see what that sort of review process looks like. So let me add a change. Perhaps we could make this suggestion more of an afterthought in a separate paragraph, paragraph at the end of this section, question mark. So I'm going to start a review, and Daniel will see these this review come in just a second. And I'm going to approve the changes. Looks good to me with one minor suggestion. So now Daniel will actually see this update in his screen.
There we go.
So that was what I was just voicing over. So from my side, I'd be happy with this change here, which is why I've approved it. Hopefully it showed as approved. Did it?
Yep,
did I approve it?
it does.
It does, great. And this is typically the way that I think it's the case on the Go project as well, isn't it, Daniel? Sometimes someone as an approver would be happy with the change, but just makes perhaps a suggestion in passing of it might actually look better than this. I certainly don't feel strongly enough to have you make this change here, because it is just a suggestion and it's quite a subjective thing in this situation here. So I'm happy. I'd be happy to approve, but let's just assume you said, no, you know what, I like that suggestion for the sake of making a change to this here, because it brings up one important thing as far as the Q project is concerned, and that is maintaining a single commit as part of a PR as well. So just to go through that workflow.
Yep. So I can do that in a sec. So vim doc contribute again, sign off. So we said, so I have a bit of Git integration with my editor, so I can do git diff here.
Okay.
Oh, right. I need to do it with master. So it shows me what was on master and the changes I made. So essentially what I want to do is leave this line as it was. So I'm just going to copy it back where it was. And then we set a new paragraph. So whoops, right. So then I created this line again as it was. And then I can create a new paragraph saying, we could say, for example, you can also set up a prepare commit message git hug to avoid, how should I put this, to not have to supply the S flag, for example.
Yep.
And now if I do git status, I've got changes again. We can see them in diff as well. So what I personally do is git commit amend. So I essentially just amend. I generally do one commit per PR, and then the flow of updating a PR is pretty simple. So I can do git commit amend.
Amend is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? Because it's not actually amending a commit per se, is it? Because commits are immutable in that way. Instead, it's creating a new commit that is the combined result of the old commit plus new changes that you have staged. Is that a fair comment?
I guess the way I see it is amend the current head of the branch, the current latest commit, to be something else, right?
In that sense, yeah, git commit minus amend is absolutely accurate there. And you're going to do minus a.
And minus a is just for like all the changes that I've got on tracked files, which is just one file. So if
we didn't actually need minus s there because the commit message already contains these signed off by. But even if we did provide it, it wouldn't have done anything because it doesn't keep duplicating that line. It looks for the special section at the end of the commit message, which is called the trailers, and it just ensures that line is in there. So we didn't actually need it in this case here.
And this change is very realistic because I was actually forgetting about the S flag right there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe the commit message is still relevant. It's still fine.
Yep, looks totally good.
So I just save and then git push force because again, right now I'm on branch contribute sign off automation that's tracking my forks same branch. So if I get pushed, that's going to fail because I amended a commit. I rewrote the commit itself.
And
So
Git doesn't know anything about the relationship between those two commits. One is not an ancestor of the other.
Right. By
Yep.
default, to be conservative, git push only allows you to add extra commits. So in this case, it's safe because it's a branch that only I own. So it's not like I'm potentially overriding other
Yep.
people's work. So git push force. And then if we go back here,
Should see the new commit actually.
And what's cool, I only learned this a few weeks ago, but you can click on the force pushed bit.
Okay.
And it's going to show you the diff between the old
nice.
PR commit and the new one, and you can see exactly the same diff I had. So
okay, so they're really improving the GitHub contribution.
Yeah, and it
the
also
review
tells you
process here.
It also tells you the old and new commits. So it's not really lost as long as you do force pushes like essentially one at a time. As soon as you do multiple force pushes, sometimes it like bundles them together, which is a bit annoying.
Yep.
But yeah, if you do just one, it's very easy. And
nice.
then here, what I would do is good suggestion, done. So I comment and I resolve.
And we talk about that whole process about responding to comments and resolving them in the best practices linked from the guide as well, because it's sort of a way of acknowledging, yes, I've done this, and as a human, instead of just relying on review tools saying, yep, I liked your suggestion, I've done it, and then resolving it. Perhaps in some situations you click resolve and accidentally didn't make the change, then the person who's reviewing it would then say, oh, hang on a second, you said this is resolved, but I don't actually see any change here. So it's a nice sort of check at the end of the day as well. Okay, great. So I approved this before. I'm not going to rerun the workflows associated with this. So what would happen now would be that I, with GerritHub, we'll come on to talk about that in a second. As a project maintainer, I don't actually merge this in GitHub, because the source of truth for the Q project is actually GerritHub itself. That is the source of truth repository. So we don't merge this, and instead the PR gets imported into GerritHub and submitted from there. So we're going to skip over that now. Let's just go back to the guide and we'll talk about... So hang on, let's just step back 1 second before jumping into the GerritHub workflow. Daniel, you've just made your first contribution to the Q project. Imagine you've done it via the GitHub workflow here, and I'd imported it and submitted it. This PR would then be merged, and you would be very happy as having made your first contribution. Anything as part of this workflow that you think we should be changing or improving the documentation of? I really like the workflow around the use of the GH command, and I'm sort of tempted to suggest that we use that as a default, perhaps, because it seems to greatly simplify the process of talking about forks, remotes, etc. Would that be perhaps we could create an issue after this that is a good first issue for someone to come in and change the contribution guide itself? What would your thoughts be on that?
I would agree with that. I'm actually a bit surprised that the official doc suggests to do the forking yourself over the web interface.
Mm-hmm.
Because something that happens to me quite often is I contribute one change, for example, Q, so I do a fork. But then, a year might pass and I forget if I even have a fork, which is what happened right here.
Yeah.
My fork was called Q-1 because I probably did a fork before, and we can probably look it up, and I just forgot about it. Yeah, there you go. I forgot about it since October 2019.
Oh, that was the original repository, actually. That was when that was pre the Google fork. So you can see there's the missing dash in Qlang there.
Yeah.
So that's understandable.
So for me, it's easier to always start from the upstream repo and then only do things from there, such as fork create, which does the remote adding and everything that I need.
I like that. I'll create an issue after this to suggest we update and improve the contribution guide in exactly that way, because it saves there's sort of quite a lot of hand waving required in order to explain the click here, then run this command. And if it can all be done via the command line, that seems more precise. I guess there's also a workflow that would happen via the GitHub desktop application. Again, I'm not so familiar with that.
I also would say don't worry too much about it, because most people already have a GitHub workflow that works for them.
Indeed, and they're going to know how to sort of orient themselves around that, even if we just present the GitHub client.
Correct, yeah.
The client-side one. Okay, great. So let's just scroll down, let's see if there's anything else that we missed here. Sending a change via GitHub. That should really just have covered all of that. we didn't actually run go test locally once we've made our change. Naughty us. We did do something similar here. We did git commit amend. That's exactly what you did. But instead of the git add step before, you did git commit minus minus amend and then minus a, which effectively makes those two a single command. And then git push minus f is the force push that Daniel referred to. And then we talk about what happens next with the review cycle complete, blah, blah, blah. PR is approved, gets imported. Fantastic. Okay. So now we're on to the next major section, which is preparing for GerritHub CL contributions. So probably just worth talking a bit about what GerritHub is here. And I'll just give a shout out to a company called Garrett Forge, and they are the company behind GerritHub. And GerritHub is their free open source version, hosted version of Garrett. And if you have projects on GitHub, whether they be public or private, you can actually you can follow exactly this process of hosting your project within GerritHub, just as we've done for the Q project, and enjoying all the benefits of Garrett code review. And we'll talk about those in a second. So GerritHub, Daniel, GerritHub is this instance that is run by Garrett Forge, but Garrett itself is an open source project, and the Go project uses it as well for its code review process. Is that right?
That is correct, and I believe Garrett started at Android and has also been used in other projects like Go itself. But I think maybe to give a too long didn't read version of why some projects use Garrett instead of GitHub, it's because it's a very powerful code review system. And we can, as we go through the contribution, I think that's going to be pretty apparent. But it's also true that GitHub PRs have gotten better over the years with code review. So, for example, now if I force push, you can see the diff between the two commits. That used to not be the case.
Yeah, I think that's it, again, sort of thinking back to one of the conversations that Marcel and I had on the Q town hall. It's about trying to think about what we're trying to solve for as far as the Q project is concerned, and obviously that's a fairly wide-ranging question. But as far as the review process is concerned, we definitely want to, as reviewers and owners of the project, optimize the review workflow. And as Daniel was alluding to there, and the same is true for the Go project, Garrett is just the best tool that we're aware of for optimizing that review workflow. And we'll see as well how everything ties in with CI in much the same way as with GitHub, but the interface is just very different. So without further ado, should we just get started on the next steps? We've got that overview there, step 0, exactly the same links as before, so we don't need to go to those. That's just effectively reminding people, hey, before you jump into this, these 3 sections here should give you an overview of how this project works from a contribution perspective. Step 1, decide which email address you want to use for contributions. This is relevant as far as people who contribute outside of work or those who contribute on behalf of their employer. That's what this is a reference to there. Making a decision about, okay, am I contributing in my capacity working for my employer, or is this just something in my spare time? So I'm guessing, Daniel, you use your personal email address for this one here.
I will, yeah.
Do you have a GerritHub account set up?
I might have signed up a long time ago, so we're going to find out.
Let's give it a go.
But before I give that a go, I thought it was also worth giving a shout out to the fact that Garrett is open source software.
Yes.
So it's a way of making a very core part of Q, which is also an open source project, not depend on GitHub Enterprise, which is a black box in essence.
Yeah. So let's just jump back to the guide. So this is the project homepage for Garrett. Let's just scroll down because again we can let's go into the detail of these here as opposed to trying to do it all from the fine. Okay. So here we go. This has got the step-by-step as far as the GerritHub is concerned.
So I've already done the global settings of my user and email and everything and my name and so on.
Perfect.
So now it's GerritHub. So just to do it step by step, I went to GerritHub.io, which is this link here. Mm-hmm. First time sign in.
And the way this works, just as Daniel's about to talk about this, is the GerritHub itself effectively acts as an authorized application within GitHub. So what's going to happen now is you're effectively going to give Garrett Forge, the company who runs GerritHub, certain permissions as an OAuth application within GitHub.
Not to get sidetracked for more than 30 seconds, but I just realized there's a typo here, and I'm going to very briefly show another way of
Oh,
contributing
yes.
changes that are not code, which is I can just click this button, edit, and then search for no, wait, where is it?
I think it was clicked with a T on the end.
Right, it's not showing. I guess it's like a different view or something. Garrett. Click
There
T.
it is.
And here I can be like, doc, fix typo.
Yeah, very nice.
And note that I'm not even using Git or anything local. This is all on the web. And I can
Go on then, let's submit this change. And I'm
And again, it's the same view that I had before for creating a PR. It's just that this is all through the web. Create pull request. Create pull request. How many times do I have to click on create pull request? That's interesting. Oh, this did not create
interesting. So
signed
this
off
is
by.
yeah.
Oh, whoops.
Okay, no, well that's interesting, right? Because I wonder whether this is actually a suggestion we can make to GitHub that in some way, if we can flag or they can detect that this is a project that requires
Yeah,
DCO,
exactly.
that could be something that is automated as part of such a. That would be quite nice. Okay.
Yeah, because I don't want to set that up as a setting for all my web
No.
created commits, because some projects don't use that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So just whether it's something they can automatically detect or we can just flag as in the configuration somewhere. Okay, that
Yeah,
would be very cool
and
because
it's
then
unfortunate because I can edit the title or the body, but I cannot edit the commit without going back to Git.
exactly doing it again. Yep. Okay, I'll watch this recording back and make that suggestion. Okay, where were we?
Doc contribute. Yeah, sorry about that, but I thought it was like an interesting side point.
Well, we've come up with a suggestion in the process, so I like that.
How many typos am I going to find, by the way?
If it's me having because I did a fairly large revamp of this doc just before, it was quite last minute, so I'm comfortable we're going to find lots.
Okay, so the next step is click T, the green sign-in button. So let's do that. When prompted, which level of GitHub access do you need? Choose default.
Yep.
And default says review and contribute to public repos using your email identity. Allow access to email address, read and push to public repos, read membership to public-private organizations. That seems reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Remember my choice. Login.
So this is effectively just, and here we go. This is, if you wanted to, you could actually specify which repositories.
I'm slightly worried that it wants to be able to write to all of my public repos. Is there any way around that?
Maybe we just go back to the previous step there. Just as a reviewer, I suspect the reviewer flow would be sufficient for what you want in that situation, because what you're not looking to do is add any of your own repositories. Right. So if you do reviewer, that will be sufficient.
It's a bit misleading because it says review and contribute to public repos. It doesn't say anything about me setting up repos on GerritHub.
That's a good point, actually. Well, let's try. Well, okay, we're going to find this out. I've never actually done reviewer. Let's go with reviewer.
Okay.
And if for whatever reason that means that you can't actually contribute to CL, we'll find that out pretty quickly, and we just have to change the scope here. I'm pretty sure this will actually work. In which case, I'll make a suggestion to the GerritHub folks that actually we can just change the wording of this to be slightly clearer.
Yeah, and this is more of a question for GerritHub than Q itself. It's just that giving write access to all my public repos is a bit iffy.
So if actually that is the case, let's just assume. So there we go. Just going to get access to your email address. Perfect. So let's see.
What? Secure connection failed. Connection not secure. What happened there?
I'm not clear.
Try again. Oh, I guess it was a fluke. I don't know.
Okay.
The internet does that sometimes.
good old demo. So you're done. You're signed in. You can see up in the top right corner your profile picture, I guess, has come from somewhere like what is Avatar?
One of those Avatar
exactly.
sites, yeah.
Fantastic. You could just jump into settings here.
Yeah.
Now, this is where you're probably going to want to stop sharing your screen at some point, because if you just jump back to the guide itself before you stop sharing your screen,
Yeah.
what we're going to do is need to set up credentials here. And this is so that you can authenticate via Git with GerritHub itself. And
Yep.
this is a fairly, unfortunately, there's no really good standard as far as this is concerned. Some people prefer to use SSH. I actually prefer to use HTTP authentication. I suggest we just do that in this case here. But then when it comes to HTTP there's a difference between Mac OS, Linux as to how people store their credentials. I happen to use a credential helper. I don't know whether you just use NetRC because your machine is secure locally, or some other credential helper. What's your preferred way of doing this?
I do use just NetRC. So I think
Fine.
what I'm going to do is move the windows to my other monitor to just do the setup step and then come
Perfect.
back.
Okay.
So give me a sec. Whoa, what happened there? Oh, didn't want to
Oh
move
wow.
that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is generate a password via your user profile. So I'm guessing that's the docs. Okay, that's
It
the
actually
one.
takes
So
you. So that's the one you're going to need to
that's
move
great.
over. Yeah.
So I'm going to move that away. Generate new password. Generating.
So I can just do a bit of voiceover here whilst you're doing those steps there. Um, yeah, this is again an unfortunately manual part of this process because there are so many different ways in that keep people maintain their credentials for command line tools. Mac OS probably, to my mind, has the nicest infrastructure as far as this is concerned with the keychain, because it's something that just any application can use automatically, as far as I'm aware. Whereas on Linux, there are just many different ways. I think GNOME Desktop Manager had a more of a built-in thing like Mac OS. But if anybody has any troubles in this space here, and we need to expand the guide in some way, shape, or form, for example, to make clear how making something like NetRC works, please let us know and we can improve the guide.
What is actually the lines that I need in NetRC? It doesn't tell me. Because NetRC is, machine login password. I know the password is the password I just created, but what are the other ones?
This is a good question, which tells me that we should have this as part of its
Because
machine. So you could have machine would be GerritHub.io, and then login,
my guess, yeah.
and
Login
then
and VLAN, I
password,
guess.
and you can have those all on separate lines.
Oh, we're getting some spam on YouTube comments.
And how do I? There we go. I can remove that. Can I hide the user on that channel? And I should remove that and remove. Hopefully that's working.
You would think that YouTube would have a grasp on spam, but
hopefully those comments have now been removed.
okay, so I've added those 3 lines, so we're just going to continue and see if that works. Otherwise, I'm going to have to Google a bit.
Sure. Okay, that's also something, therefore, that we should add, at least for those people who want to do things via NetRC.
But otherwise, we can fall back to SSH, which is also an option. I also have an SSH key.
Yeah, let's try and make NetRC work for today, because I think there's actually one outstanding issue with SSH in any case that I'm working with the GerritHub folks on.
So then visit this page, click, copy the clone.
Yeah, so now you should be able to click on the HTTP tab that's just below download there.
That's interesting. Clone with commit message hook.
Yes. So have you selected HTTP as opposed to anonymous HTTP there?
Oh.
That's quite funky.
That's interesting. Go doesn't use this bit about non-anonymous HTTP. What's the difference?
It's literally that, is that if you do anonymous HTTP, you then have to, as far as I'm aware, set up some other means of telling Git what your username is, because it can't be inferred. Whereas with HTTP, the remote that is set up here has, as you can see, your username, and that's your Garrett username. I think the way it works with the Go project is that doesn't it do things via Git cookies? And so it doesn't even need to know who
Yeah.
you are. So the cookie itself identifies who you are.
Yep, and I believe Git cookies.
You're sharing that screen, by the way.
Oh,
So
shoot. Yeah, that's a good point. I need to delete that now. Oh no.
I'll let you on another screen. I'll let you go and regenerate those. The wonders of live stream.
How many minutes do I have before I get? Well, luckily this is only Go review and Q review, so I actually set up Q review. I'm guessing a long time ago, and I set it up with Git cookies as opposed to netrc.
Okay. Yep.
I'm guessing either works.
Well, Git cookies is the way it works via Google's Garrett setup.
Oh, it doesn't work with GerritHub?
No, so they don't have, at least not that I'm aware of. In any case, I think it works as a plugin to Garrett. And as you saw, you didn't have the option of effectively clicking through to generate a cookie. Instead, you had the option to generate a password.
I'm sorry, I'm just furiously Googling how to revocate Git cookies on
I
Garrett.
think you can just go to generate them again. I'll send you offline the link to where you've got to get to.
Oh yeah, I found it. Revoke Cookies. Okay.
Sorry, your screen lag was such that you'd already done it by the time that I saw it on the screen.
No, it's I should know better. Okay, remove access. Okay, it's gone.
That might do it across the entire suite of Google Garretts.
Yeah, so it's on my account at google.com/permissions, and then you can revocate cookies. And one of those cookies was Go's code review.
Perfect. Okay.
And Q doesn't show up there, so I think my Q cookie expired a while ago.
Fine. Okay.
Okay. Moving on.
That was fun. So now you're going to use the commit message hook as well. Okay, I'd give that one a shot.
So do I want the commit hook?
Yep, you certainly can do that one. I think I did that one originally.
So right, this is doing another clone. So I'm gonna.
Yeah. So let's just imagine we didn't actually do the clone of the Git repo, right?
So I'm just gonna keep the GitHub clone as Q GitHub, just so
Nice.
I don't lose it for now.
Okay.
Because I do have one open PR that I want to keep. So
yeah.
So let's just paste that, and let me just read that because I'm not sure I trust copying and pasting into my shell.
Yep.
So clone, make dir curl, and this is downloading a commit message script and then just putting it there. Yeah, sounds good.
So it's not actually going to run it. So you could even
authentication failed. Yeah, so I guess my netrc is not right.
So I would be doing
I wrote GerritHub.io. I'm gonna write review.gerrithub.io.
Okay. So the format I think is machine space and then review.gerrithub.io. New line, login space your login, which is mvdan. New line.
That still failed. Let me just go through like generating a new password again, just in case I messed something up. Because I did click that thing multiple times. I don't know if I copied the last one. Okay, copy. Paste. Try again. Oh yeah, now it works. So I did mess it up somehow.
Okay, no problem at all. But that again just highlights that there's got to be a better way of actually documenting that.
Yeah,
You could just do a cat of .git/hooks commit message to see what is put in there. Hopefully,
no, was it
just commit dust message. Yeah.
So what this does, I'm guessing, is some basic checks of
Around
whether
the
I'm
change
creating a
ID and things.
change, who am I?
Oh, actually, some of this might be, so to be fair, some of this is made unnecessary by the use of the Git code review tool that we'll move on to talking about in a second. Okay, nice. So that's not essential, incidentally. So we could have just done a plain clone, excuse me. Okay.
And just to add to what you just said about making it easier to add the netRC entry, what Google does is they give you a command that you can paste into your shell to just add the right lines to your Git cookies file. So I think something like that for netRC would be really nice. For GerritHub, that is.
Yeah, as far as that's possible, because of course you've got that having to copy paste the password. So yeah, I think we need to have a think about how to make that a bit cleaner. So okay, so back to the contribution guide.
Okay, so we have to install the Git code review command.
Yep. So yeah, as we just saw, when Daniel did a clone there, it actually created a commit message hook. That means that whenever Git is creating a commit message, it's running some shell as part of that. And sort of a key part of making a contribution to Garrett is that the commit is the actual unit of change itself. And it's the thing that identifies the change. And that's a bit tricky because, of course, the commit SHA, the hash sum of the commit actually changes with every any change you might make to the commit itself. And so the thing that Garrett uses to link commits that are otherwise unrelated is something called the change ID. And we'll see that in a second. And the Git code review tool that we're going to install here, one of its main functions is ensuring that change ID is added to a commit message, but it also massively helps the workflow around using Garrett as well. We'll see that more clearly as well as we come to use it, but that's why we're installing this tool here.
And just to be clear, I can run this anywhere. It doesn't really matter. As long as I have a recent Go version, I can run this inside the Q module, and it's still going to be fine.
Yeah, because it's going to do that sort of global install, isn't it, outside of the...
So just to check that git-code review exists, because that's the binary that I installed.
Yep.
Great. So that works. Supposedly Git code review should also work. Yep. So it's essentially... I believe anything called git-something can also be used as git space something, right?
Oh, interestingly, if you just do git code review -h again, that should show you the -s flag. Is your path set up to where will have it installed git code review? Yes, so here's a good example actually of Go version -m is a way of saying show me all the module information that is associated.
Yeah, so it downloaded git code review from like September, which I'm guessing is the latest. We could go check X review.
Oh goodness, have I when I made this change to add the -s flag, did I not update the documentation, as in on the command line? That would be bad.
Oh, they moved this here. I don't like it. GitHub.com Golang review.
Yeah.
And I think, latest commit is September. So yeah, I think it's just the docs that are not up to date.
Oh dear. Right. Well, there's a to-do for me. The change I made to Git code review to add the -s flag didn't get documented on the command line. That's a bit sad. It's actually documented in the package documentation.
Well, if you do, what command was it? Was it change? Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't help. Help change. Okay, no, that doesn't help either. Okay, then yeah, I guess it's missing. Because I was expecting it to find it maybe like here, like...
Well, like exactly, yeah. It should be clearly documented. It is documented in the package documentation, so if somebody were to actually try and understand via package.go.dev, what Git code review is actually doing, they would see. Oh, there we go. So if you just you had the page open there actually. There you have expand the documentation
Oh, I
at
have
the
to go
top.
into the Git code review. S. Pending. The S flag. No. No, it's not there. Oh, this is not master. I
Okay.
didn't know there was a release.
Yes,
Okay.
that's why we. That's actually.
Yeah, the S option adds blah 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 blah. Change.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so it's missing here and in the help.
Fine. Okay, great. I will have that as a to-do for me. So, okay, so back to our guide. So we've installed Git code reviews. As we said, that's going to help as far as the workflow to use Garrett is concerned. Great.
I just noticed another issue. Note that in here, in step 2, it says, set up a GerritHub account, and it ends with generating the credential, that's fine, and cloning, and then step 4 is cloning.
Yes.
So I believe we can delete this.
Perfect. Yep.
Because I believe it's just...
Yeah, no, it will be identical. That is just
So let's use our trusty... Oh, that's not going to create...
It's not going to do your signed off by, is it?
That
would be really cool if it just works straight from the browser.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm too lazy to like go back now on the thing also. Clone. No, I wanted to go to the next one, and it just entered a new line.
I think I had that the other day. Actually, I found that somewhat counterintuitive.
This is why web editors are never going to replace Vim. Set up a GerritHub account. Okay.
Well, isn't it the case that you could have hit dot and it would have opened Visual Studio Code for you as well? Were you?
Yeah,
in the browser.
Yeah, but I don't think I want to get into that today.
That would be brave to do in a live stream for sure.
I've never used Visual Studio Code, so
very brave then to do in a live stream.
How many more credentials can I show on stream with an ID?
Exactly.
I guess I might as well spell it properly. No, not GerritHub. Okay, it's gonna fail, but at least this way I'm not gonna forget about it. I can just fix it up later.
Fantastic.
Okay. Sorry, back on track. Install, that's done. Clone, that's done. Sending a change. Okay.
Yeah, so now we're sort of shifting into this mode. So we had the prepare steps that we've now done for GerritHub. So as you can see, they're more involved than GitHub itself. And so you might think, okay, well, why would I bother if it's more involved doing things via GerritHub? I guess the point we made earlier on is that doing things via GerritHub, then the Garrett flow is actually just much more advanced as far as the review process is concerned later on. Cool. Okay, let's crack on because I'm aware we're well over time as well.
Okay, so just as before with Go 117, I want to run Go test, and that should succeed just the same. It's essentially the same commit, I imagine, unless anything has changed.
Yep.
And then we want to make a sample change, and the change while this runs that I was thinking about is on the README. I noticed that the install from source directions still give instructions for Go 115 and earlier, and I think at this point we could probably remove that.
Yeah,
because
good
Go
point.
116 came out, I believe, over a year ago, like a year and 3 months ago or something like that. So I think we can reasonably assume people have that, and if they don't, well, we can still say if you're using Go 116 or later.
Yep, totally. That seems like a good suggestion.
So git status. I have some aliases, so if I ever type things like that, I'm sorry. It's just my muscle memory.
No, it's fine. I'll try and shout them out as we go.
Git switch C again to create a branch, and I'm going to call this readme go install 116, and I'm gonna. I believe this is in the.
It's in the root of the repo.
Yeah, but I moved the GitHub one, so I believe that was the other clone still.
So, I see. Sorry, that the current directory was. I see.
Yeah, that would have been very confusing. So I want git
Go 111.
Install. if you already have Go 116 or later installed, and then we could do this.
Yeah.
And then I'm guessing the install one goes into more detail. Oh, it actually has the same bit. So let me see. Git grep go on module. So I believe we can do the same change here. To download and install the command to run.
Yeah, that makes sense. Looks like there's some consolidation we can do here as far as the documentation is concerned too.
Oh, there's actually a bit of a mistake here as well. I believe this is install, no? No, go get.
What did it say, sorry?
Go get Q at latest.
No, that's to download. That's actually for downloading the API and documentation. So that will be in a module context.
Oh, so that is that to like put it in your cache?
No, well, that would be to just use. I think what you're probably alluding to there is actually a good suggestion to change it to make it clear if you want to use Q in your Go module. That it's not clearer, right? That the use of the word download there is just misleading,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I would say to update your Q dependency. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
To download install Q, run blah 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 blah, and I think I'm gonna say if the command fails, make sure your version of Go is 116 or later.
Yep.
And I'm gonna leave the other bit alone for now.
Yep, that seems good. That just gets us started, right? So here we've got our change kind of ready at this point.
So we've got the README change and a similar change to install.md. So let me go back to prepare changes. So we did the checkout B, switch C, same thing.
Exactly, same
Edited
thing.
the
Yep.
files. I'm actually gonna. I use a slightly different flow with Git code review, which
Sure.
is
Okay.
I just use git commit straight away.
I actually do the same. So I really included this out of completeness because I think Git code review itself ensures the change ID is present and it doesn't
Right. I
assume
believe it's equivalent. Like either using git code review change or using git commit as long as you set up the commit hook.
commit hooks. Yeah, which we just to remind everybody, that's what happened when we copied that sort of rather long command from the GerritHub page itself.
Yep.
Okay.
So I am going to just do a commit like I did on GitHub because I just find that to be the easiest way.
Yep.
So git commit all, and I'm not gonna give it the S flag because wait, no, I think I still need the S flag
You
because
will do, yeah, because you haven't
the
created a
the
command.
hook I installed was for the change ID, not for the signed off by.
Exactly. Yep.
So if I do this,
There we
and
go. We've got you signed off by. Fantastic.
and for anybody wondering, the change ID doesn't show up here yet. It's gonna show up after I finish the commit because I believe. No, actually doesn't. I actually don't know how it works, but I believe it is going to show up after I hit commit.
Yep.
Um,
Well, I think it has to. Is it perhaps because the change ID itself is?
hash?
No, I was going to say. Is it some
No,
sort of hash of the message
no.
itself? But that
I
wouldn't
think
make
it's
sense
just a
because
very
you.
long random number because it's
Yep.
constant even if you change the
Yeah.
commit. So yeah, I think it could show up here. I don't know why it doesn't.
Who knows?
Oh, I know why. Because it only adds itself if change ID doesn't already exist, and I guess it can only do that at a later stage.
Because you might add it manually because you're, whatever, by
Or,
trying to
or,
link it to something that already exists.
or maybe you're
Potentially.
doing git commit amend and you don't want to like add it twice. But
Good point. Yep.
I don't know. I'm guessing. So let's say simplify install simplify go in no simplify simplify install instructions assuming go 116 plus. And I'm not going to use the doc prefix because I am also editing the top level readme. I think that's reasonable. And I can say, when was Go 1.16 released? Let's see.
Actually,
February.
in those situations where you're doing a top-level README thing, I just tend to prefix it with README : for example,
Yeah,
or
but
just doc.
I think doing README, I think doing something like this is maybe a bit overkill.
Yeah,
I
totally.
don't know.
Yeah, just
And
for something that's so top level, there's nothing hard and fast to fix there.
yeah. So I can say Go 1.16 was released nearly a year ago. I got the math wrong earlier. And Go 1.15 and earlier are no longer supported by upstream. Simplify the install steps by no longer mentioning. How's that?
Yeah, that looks great to me.
So if I save and quit, and then if I do git log. So yeah, it added the change ID after the fact. And
yeah, great. So that's the change ID that, as we said, effectively Garrett uses in order to link commits, i.e. commits that would otherwise be unrelated because there's no relationship between them. Effectively, whenever the latest commit that you submit with that change ID, if I'm right, Garrett then uses it to link to a particular CL.
not to bother you again, but we're getting some more spam, and it doesn't seem to be stopping.
Okay, I think that's now I will deal with that.
So while you deal with that, I'll just continue with the steps here.
I'm going to put the user in a timeout.
It's a different user. Just block them.
Block isn't an option, unfortunately. So
well, that's unfortunate. Okay, so you can edit the commit description, blah, blah, blah. Would automatically add a unique change ID, which we saw. So essentially, the Garrett's change ID is the unique identifier for this change that I'm making.
Yep.
The equivalent of a PR, whereas a PR is just, it gets a number once you post it. On Garrett, there's a universally unique random number for
that
your
you've
change.
generated in this case, as opposed to GitHub.
And the random number is so long that there's just basically no chance that it's ever going to conflict with anything else. That's
Yep.
why you can get it locally before pushing.
Great. Okay.
It talks about what you need to do if you want to make changes again, like update your change. I'm not going to go over that again because we sort of showed it with the git commit amend as
Yeah,
well
I'd
before.
agree. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Test your changes. I'm not going to do this because we only edited docs, but
Yep.
if we had changed any Go code, we would do that.
Completely.
And then this is the part that differs the most from GitHub, I would say, which is once you actually want to submit.
Yep.
So instead of doing GHPR create, that kind of thing, we need to talk to a different API, and in this case, that is the GerritHub API. So if I do git code review mail, success.
And
So
there we
if
go. That also tells us that the reviewer scope that you asked for earlier on is sufficient. So I will update the docs for that because I think it's I prefer to have a narrower scope be suggested as the default.
Definitely. I would say that's maybe even a bug that should be raised with GerritHub, because they say to contribute to a public project, you need to give us write access to all your repos, which is evidently not necessary.
Yeah, indeed.
So I just opened the link that it gave me.
Okay.
And we can see that this UI is sort of similar to the GitHub PR UI. It's just slightly different in some ways. For example, it's more powerful in that I can edit my commit message straight from the web UI, whereas I couldn't do that from GitHub. Paul can also review the changes, just like GitHub.
Yep. What I'm actually going to do from my side is trigger what we call the try bots, which are 1 second. The try bots, which are the equivalent of the CI. The CI is a part of GitHub Actions. It actually uses GitHub Actions as part of the in order to run CI, the continuous integration checks. But what we should see in just a second is messages being updated on this CL here. And CL stands for change list, I think, doesn't it? Is that just what has become the way of referring to a single change within Garrett?
Yeah, it's just what they called pull request. A pull request is also not really truly correct because you can merge them without pulling. You can cherry pick them, right?
Yeah.
So I think PR is just as much of a misnomer as CL. They're both just meaning a change, right?
So if you just refresh that page now, actually, Daniel, you should see down at the bottom a couple of messages have come
Oh,
in.
wait, what did I do? I think I probably clicked something. Okay, so I refreshed.
Down at the bottom, you should see that
Yeah,
Q Cuckoo has added a couple of messages saying that it started Unity, which, as we said, is this regression testing setup, and the build itself, which is and you should be able to click through to those. And the build is the full CI matrix, in effect. So what will happen here is, let's just imagine that CI failed in some way, shape, or form, that would be reported back automatically by either the build itself or Unity. And so we would then see, and I triggered this by running something locally on my side. So this didn't just happen by magic. Again, it needs one of the project maintainers in order to trigger the CI side of things. So let me just add a comment to one of your changes, and we can see what that review process looks like.
and while he does that, to give a bit of context as to why maintainers have to approve the running of CI, it's because otherwise I could add a Go test that, for example, burns CPU for an hour. And you don't want your contributors to be able to DOS you to cause trouble like that, especially if they're new, because sometimes you get spam. That just happens.
And not only that, you can leak credentials in very subtle ways that are hard
Yeah.
for a sort of an automated system to detect if you have complicated workflows, and so it just keeps it simpler. Thanks, look good to me. I'm not going to actually sort of request any changes in this situation. I'm just going to show. So there we go. I've just added a comment with a +2 if you want to refresh on your side.
It's interesting because on Go's Garrett, I get a pop-up saying, "Hey, new changes. Do you want to refresh?" But I don't hear.
Oh, that's interesting because I tend to get that. So not quite sure what's going on there.
Maybe it's a setting that I somehow have off or something. I don't know.
Okay,
Okay, so
that's
you left
certainly.
one comment that's resolved, and I don't. Do
Oh,
I
I
need to
didn't
say?
mark it as resolved. Okay.
Well, I can do ACK.
Yep.
So ACK
So
means like I acknowledge this. Okay, resolved. And
yeah.
I
So
can just
what's interesting is that you've in actually. So just before you send that. Oh, okay, no problem.
sorry.
That no, it much like and GitHub's moved to this model as well, where effectively you build up a series of drafts of your responses, and GerritHub is exactly the same. So Daniel clicked the ACK button there, which effectively created a draft. Oh, here we go. Here's yet another comment. Okay, so that has just created a draft, right, and that has not been sent yet. And so to reply, you then just click the reply button. That allows you to then see the drafts that you've got below, but also at the top level, provide a comment as well. So say something nice. This is a top level comment. There we go. Great.
Just to clarify, something that's really cool about Garrett and that GitHub doesn't have yet is that I can review the commit message, which is really
Yes.
important.
Yeah.
Commit messages also matter a lot. So I could leave this.
And that's
then,
fundamentally because Garrett uses the commit as like the unit of change. That the commit message itself becomes absolutely central to part of the review. Which, if you read through the commit, the history of either the Go project or the Q project, that starts to jump out at you because you can read a commit and understand just from the commit message itself just everything about the change itself, and it means that things are nicely separated into separate commits as well. Cool. Okay. So this is all approved now already, isn't it? So what I would then do, I'm just going to, because I can, I don't think we've actually had a reply from the trybots yet. No, so they're still going. I'm just going to imagine that the trybots came back as +1, which they will, at the sort of barring any flakes, because this is just a documentation change. What I'm going to do is I'm approver from my side. I haven't got my screen shared, but what I'm going to do is I've already +2'd this, which is the equivalent of an approve in the GitHub workflow. Now I'm going to hit the submit button, and submit is effectively the GerritHub equivalent, of GitHub's merge. So that just means this change is going to get, as Daniel said, cherry picked and added as the latest on the master branch. So that has now been submitted and now shows as merged. So quick refresh on your side. And again, we'll look into why that's not automatically telling you about the change. You can see top left-hand corner, it's green and merged. So now if you jump over to the GitHub repository itself, in like a separate tab, perhaps just open to just
Yep,
check that the
there you go.
latest commit is indeed your one. There we go. Fantastic. So there we go. Daniel congratulations, you've now completed a GerritHub contribution as well. I'm very aware of the time. We've gone hopelessly over time here. So thank you very much for your time, Daniel. Is there anything else from your side that you wanted to sort of highlight as sort of being important as part of this contribution process? I'll stop sharing your screen for now so we can.
Okay. No, I think we went over the basics of contributing both ways. I guess just to highlight that if any of this seems weirdly complex or does not fit your workflows very well, if you go into the docs, there's more ways of doing things. So just for
Yeah.
example, if you would rather not have to set up hooks for Garrett, you can just use the Git code review. There's like these subtle different ways of doing things which might fit your workflow better. I just showed the way I do it.
Yeah, and that's I think key here is that, well, as you demonstrated via the web contribution workflow as well, the GitHub client, GerritHub, there are lots of different ways, and I think that's an important part of what we're trying to do with the Q project is ensure that whatever workflow is familiar for people, that they're comfortable with, they should just be able to use that and feel able to contribute to the Q project. That said, it is a large open source project, so back to Daniel's point earlier on, there are processes in place. They don't exist in order to create red tape. They just exist in order to make the running of the project overall easier. And so whether it's perhaps slight friction points in your first contribution, hopefully, if it's something that we can address by better documentation, we can easily fix those things and make it easier for other people who are coming to contribute to the project. But otherwise, with dare I say, practice and habit, these things, for example, I found it really awkward when using Garrett for the first time, but now as a regular contributor to the Go project and to Q, it is just second nature. But please give us feedback on all these things. We're obviously going to try and improve things where we can, and appreciate everybody's feedback. Daniel, thank you very much indeed for your time today. I'm just trying to have a quick look at my notes and see if there's anything else. I think we have covered everything. I'm just going to remind everybody of there it is, the Twitter account for Q Project. Please follow us on there. And as we said earlier on, please, if you've got any questions about contributing or just about Q Project itself, please feel free to create a discussion in the GitHub repository. Or if you find any issues, as we said, that's a really good way of contributing, raising issues with bug reports or feature requests as well. Thank you very much. And we don't have any plans yet for the timing of the next live stream, but we'll be announcing that over Twitter. So look forward to seeing everybody then. Thanks again, Daniel.
Thanks to you.
Bye-bye.